There are moments when a product failure becomes more than a mistake. It becomes a signal, a warning about what happens when branding runs faster than reality. Tonight's story isn't about gossip. It isn't about celebrity drama. And it definitely isn't about internet outrage culture. This is about trust, about expectations deliberately set high, and about what happens when those expectations collapse the moment a box is opened. Because sometimes the smallest details reveal the biggest truths. And sometimes the most expensive products expose the weakest foundations. What you're about to hear is not an isolated complaint. It's a pattern. And once you see it clearly, it becomes impossible to ignore. Now let's talk about the product that sparked it all. Imagine ordering a candle. Not an ordinary one, but a $64 candle sold as a symbol of luxury, refinement, and obsessive craftsmanship. You wait for delivery. The packaging arrives. You open it carefully, and then you realize something is wrong. There is no wick, no defect, no damage. Just a candle that cannot be lit. A candle that cannot do the one thing a candle exists to do. At first glance, that sounds like a manufacturing error. A rare mistake that slipped past quality control. But it wasn't. Customers across multiple shipments reported the same issue. Same product, same flaw. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. And honestly, it couldn't be a more perfect metaphor for what followed. A product designed to represent light, luxury, and care, delivering nothing but disappointment. Because this isn't really about a candle. It's about the sudden unraveling of American Riviera Orchard, the lifestyle brand positioned as Meghan Markle's polished entry into premium consumer goods. This wasn't marketed as another celebrity name slapped onto generic products. It was presented as elevated, curated, sophisticated, a brand meant to live in tasteful kitchens and carefully styled homes. The pricing reinforced that image. $64 for a candle, $36 for a jar of spread, $19 for a portion of jam small enough to disappear in a hotel minibar. These weren't everyday prices. They were signals. You're not just buying food or fragrance. You're buying identity, taste, belonging, and that's where the promise began to crack. Because the brand was built on one defining claim, a freakish attention to detail. Those weren't critics' words. They were the founder's own. Keep that phrase in mind. Because everything that follows makes it painfully ironic. When the products launched, the headlines arrived exactly on cue. Sold out in under an hour. Massive demand. Instant success. But one question was never answered. How many units were actually available? 1,000? 100? 50? No one knows. And without that number, sold out becomes meaningless. It stops being evidence of success and starts looking like a carefully engineered headline. By limiting supply, you can manufacture urgency. You can generate hype. You can create the illusion of demand. But illusions don't survive contact with customers. And when people opened their boxes, the story changed fast. The wickless candle was only the beginning. What followed was a cascade of quality failures, missed expectations, and customer frustration that exposed how fragile this luxury image really was. And that's where this story truly begins. What customers found next only deepened the damage. Labels were applied so unevenly they looked rushed, careless, almost accidental. In one case, a customer pointed out that the label was crooked on both the front and the back of the same jar. Think about that. Getting it wrong once might be a mistake. Getting it wrong twice on the same product is a process failure. And that raised an obvious question. What kind of quality control allows something like that to pass inspection? Then there were the jars themselves. Multiple customers reported containers that were visibly underfilled, not slightly uneven, noticeably short. For a product priced at $36, that's not a minor oversight. That's a breach of trust. Worse, the contents didn't behave like a spread at all. Customers described tilting the jar and watching the mixture pour out like syrup. Thin, watery, unstable. That's not jam. That's not preserves. That's expectation collapsing in real time. Several people also reported jars that weren't properly sealed. No vacuum lock. No resistance when opening the lid. No reassuring pop. That's not just disappointing. That's a food safety issue. When you sell consumable products at luxury prices, proper sealing isn't optional. It's fundamental. The tea products followed the same pattern. When opened, the aroma was strong and promising, rich, fragrant. But once brewed, the illusion disappeared. Customers said it tasted like lightly tinted water. All scent, no substance. Presentation doing the heavy lifting while the product itself delivered almost nothing. By now, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Then came the decorative dried flowers. These were marketed as the brand's signature flourish, a whimsical, romantic detail meant to elevate the entire experience. Instead, customers opened their boxes to find brown, wilted, crushed fragments. Multiple people used nearly identical descriptions, potpourri forgotten in a drawer for years. At this point, imagine being the buyer. You gave the brand the benefit of the doubt. You ignored skepticism. You trusted the pricing. And in return, you received crooked labels, runny spreads, weak tea, and flowers that looked long past their moment. That isn't luxury. It isn't premium. It feels dismissive. And remember, all of this came from a brand that openly claimed a freakish attention to detail. The only thing freakish here is the gap between promise and reality. But the most damaging revelation hadn't even surfaced yet. Let's talk about the product marketed as Sussex sprinkles. They were sold as edible floral garnishes, an elevated finishing touch, elegant, sophisticated. Except people with small pets recognized them instantly, because they were identical to dried flower mixes sold in pet stores, the same blends given to rabbits, guinea pigs, and hamsters. This wasn't speculation. Multiple customers with first-hand experience pointed it out independently. Same flowers, same cuts, same appearance. The only difference was the price. A product sold for pennies as animal treats was being repackaged and marketed to humans as a luxury garnish. That's not clever branding. That's contempt for consumer intelligence. Did no one think someone would notice? That a single pet owner might recognize it immediately? Then there was the wine. And this may be the most damaging issue of all. Reports suggest the so-called artisanal wine was sourced from bulk suppliers. The same type used for corporate events and promotional giveaways. Cheap wine, bought in volume, relabeled, resold at a premium. Not from a boutique vineyard, not from small batch production, just ordinary mass market wine dressed up as something exclusive. At this point, the brand's image didn't just crack. It collapsed. Because once consumers realize the story matters more than the substance, they stop believing anything the brand says next. And that loss of credibility is far harder to recover from than a bad review. What this all points to is a very specific business model. It's called white labeling. You take the cheapest available version of a product, apply your branding, inflate the price, and rely on perception to do the rest. The margin comes not from craftsmanship, but from image. That model only works if customers never look too closely. In this case, they did. And once people started digging, the picture became uncomfortable very quickly. But product quality wasn't the only issue raising serious concerns. There's another layer to this story that goes beyond candles and jam. It goes to judgment, boundaries, and symbolism. Let's talk about the branding itself. The lifestyle label was marketed as American Riviera Orchard. But every product carried a quiet signature phrase, as ever. Those two words aren't random. They carry history. For years, Princess Diana signed her private correspondence the same way. As ever, Diana. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a brand. It was a personal farewell, a closing that conveyed consistency, affection, and sincerity. People who received letters from her cherished that detail because it felt intimate and human. That phrase was later trademarked for commercial use, applied to candles, spreads, wine, and decorative garnishes. At that point, the question stops being legal and becomes ethical. Is there any line that shouldn't be crossed when it comes to monetizing legacy? Is anything off limits when brand recognition is at stake? There was no personal relationship, no lived connection, no shared history. Yet a deeply personal sign-off from a deceased public figure was repurposed into a luxury lifestyle label. You can argue whether that's technically permissible. What's far harder to defend is whether it shows restraint, respect, or good taste. To understand why this struck such a nerve, it helps to look at a direct comparison. The royal estate at Highgrove has sold similar products for years. Jams, preserves, candles. Here's the difference. A jar of jam from Highgrove costs roughly $11. It's larger than the $19 alternative being discussed here. The ingredients are grown on the estate itself, and every penny of profit goes to charity. The candles sell for around $40. They contain multiple working wicks. The quality is consistent, and again, proceeds support charitable causes. So let's be clear about what the market is comparing. On one side, higher quality products at lower prices with profits directed toward public good. On the other, lower quality items sold at premium prices with profits retained privately. That contrast doesn't require commentary. It speaks for itself. What makes this especially important is where the feedback came from. Not critics, not commentators, customers, people who purchased both product lines and compared them directly. Side by side, taste tests, packaging, consistency, the conclusions were strikingly similar. The less expensive products outperformed the premium ones. That isn't media bias. That's consumer experience. Then came the returns, not isolated complaints volume. And here's the detail that mattered most. Many returned items were never opened, still sealed, untouched. Customers took one look and sent them back immediately. When buyers reject a product on arrival, the problem isn't expectations, it's perceived value. Officially, returns weren't supposed to be accepted at all. The policy was clear. But customer service inquiries surged anyway. Retail conversations stalled. Potential partnerships went silent. Even a high-profile endorsement from a globally influential figure failed to move inventory. When a product doesn't sell despite that level of exposure, the issue isn't visibility. It's substance. This wasn't a coordinated backlash. It wasn't a smear campaign. It wasn't hostile press. It was something far more difficult to dismiss. Ordinary customers looked at what they received, weighed the price against the quality, and quietly walked away. And that, more than any headline, is what ultimately defines a brand's fate. In the end, the problem was simple. The quality never lived up to the promise. What was sold as luxury turned out to be aspiration dressed up as reality, exposed through crooked labels, underfilled jars, and a candle that couldn't even be lit. The goal was clear from the start. This brand was meant to prove that refinement, taste, and so-called freakish attention to detail were enough to build a premium lifestyle empire on their own, without leaning on titles, history, or inherited prestige. That was the pitch. What arrived was something very different. Instead of craftsmanship, customers received shortcuts. Instead of precision, they found carelessness. Instead of warmth and light, they opened a box containing a wickless candle. And it's hard to imagine a more perfect symbol. A product designed to create ambiance that delivers nothing at all. Wax in a jar, priced as luxury, functioning as nothing. If we're being honest, the name that fits this experience isn't as ever. It's as if. As if this is worth $64. As if this represents luxury. As if the person behind it truly understands what quality, craftsmanship, and attention to detail look like beyond marketing language. Consumers responded in the only way that actually matters. They returned the products. They stopped buying. They shared what they saw. Major media outlets noticed, but the damage had already been done at the customer level. No amount of carefully curated social media posts or friendly celebrity coverage can undo what happens when a box is opened and expectations collapse on contact with reality. You can choose any title you like. You can price products as if they belong in the top tier of the market. You can even trademark phrases associated with beloved public figures. But if what's inside the package doesn't justify what's printed on the label, people will figure it out. They always do. Markets have a way of cutting through illusion that branding alone never can. And that's where things stand now. A lifestyle brand launched with enormous fanfare is facing market rejection. Returns increased. Complaints mounted. Quality issues became impossible to dismiss or reframe. This isn't just about a celebrity product line falling short. That happens all the time. What makes this case different is the size of the gap. the distance between promise and reality, between luxury pricing and bulk sourcing, between the claim of obsessive detail and the evidence customers actually held in their hands. That gap tells a larger story about authenticity and respect for consumers, about what happens when branding becomes more important than building products worthy of the price being charged. The wickless candle will likely be remembered long after the headlines fade. It's too precise a metaphor to forget. A product meant to illuminate, to elevate, to offer something special that ultimately does nothing at all. And that metaphor extends beyond this one brand. It speaks to the difference between image and substance, between marketing narratives and lived experience, between what's promised and what's delivered. So the lesson here is not complicated. If you claim luxury, you must deliver it. If you charge premium prices, the product must earn them. And in a world where customers share photos, reviews, and comparisons instantly, failure cannot be hidden behind public relations. People talk, they compare notes, they recognize shortcuts. And once that awareness spreads, no endorsement or carefully managed image can rebuild the illusion. This is the reality of modern consumer markets. Quality matters, consistency matters, and trust, once broken, is extremely difficult to recover. When branding runs too far ahead of substance, the market eventually closes the gap loudly. And that is exactly what happened here.